joiners, but we can start right now.
All right. All right, so let's get started, everybody. So last week we started, we did the lesson on overcoming stage fright, and it went well. So we're still going to go over the overcoming stage fright worksheet because the worksheet itself is a good way to catch up on the lesson. So we have the worksheet just has one question. It says list 5 methods that would help you in overcoming stage fright. So what we're all going to do is we're going to really quick go around to everybody, and everyone will give an example or one method that they use to overcome stage fright. So we'll start with Doris.
Okay, the way to overcome stage fright is to get there earlier so that you have enough time for preparation.
Good. That's a really good way to overcome stage fright. Next up, Lily.
Okay, I think is that to get well prepared. If you prepare well, maybe you have rehearsal like 10 or 20 times. Maybe you can overcome the stage fright.
Great. Yeah. I think that's a good one. Andrea, would you like to go next?
I will practice many times, and then my PowerPoint makes perfect. So I believe practice makes perfect. I will practice many times at my home.
Great. And Vicky, would you like to go next?
Besides a lot of practice, last time you also suggest that I can chew gum before stage and take a breath. Yeah.
Good. Those are all really good ways to overcome stage fright. Great job. So what we're going to do next is move into lesson 5. Oh. I think we're going to try to move back over into large grid mode. So I changed it for the whole call. So what we're going to do is go over lesson 5, which is the effective use of visual aids. And I'm not sure if you guys can hear, but I have a very young dog, and she's barking a little bit. So I'm sorry, I can't control her.
No, I cannot hear anything.
Great. So visual aids can powerfully help the effectiveness of a speech. Many speeches benefit from having objects, images, key quotes, or data presented in a clear or dramatic fashion. Visual aids vary in kind, but there are similar benefits and tips for dealing with any kind of supplementary evidence that is shown to an audience. So I've talked to you guys about visual aids before and sort of what different types of visual aids there are and a little bit of how to use them. So I've mentioned that like you are a visual aid, and that's why you need to be able to use body language effectively. And there's a lot of reasons for using visual aids. And I made some sort of sample visual aids for this class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with the class. And all right. Oh, is it working? I don't think so.
I think you are using a Mac, I assume.
Yes.
So if you go to your system preference and go to privacy security settings, and then you will see screen recording, you check Skype, then you are able to share your screen.
All right.
System preference.
let's see here. Oh, general.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
okay, let me see.
Uh,
So system preferences, and then security and privacy. Check, and use screen recording. You go to screen recording.
let's see. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and check Skype.
Yeah, I didn't have Skype checked. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, let's try again.
Okay, it's going to make me redo the call. So I have to restart Skype. Actually, I think the call is going to stay on. I'm just going to have to disconnect for 1 second.
All right, we'll wait for you. 顺便跟大家讲一下，如果对方因为大家以后都还有机会跟美国老师然后如果他们美国用很多人都用那个苹果电脑，所以他们如果分享都看到他们的桌面 desktop 而已，那就是表示他们的 system preference 没有去修改 security， 就是他们会保护他们的萤幕不要被人家看到，所以就要去改。Okay.
All right.
See if it works this time.
Okay. I think this will work. And then,
Yes. Yeah.
Is it on my visual aids PowerPoint here?
Yes. Pi. Reasons to use visual aids.
Perfect.
Yeah, good.
And can you guys see my mouse moving?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to provide some slides for you guys, just to make my points a little bit more clear. So we have reasons to use visual aids, and the first reason is that it improves audience understanding and memory. And this is because when you see something as well as hear it, you're much more likely to be able to understand and remember information. The second reason to use visual aids is that it serves as a basis for people taking notes. We have a lot of teachers in the class, and I'm sure you guys all know, and before, everybody was a student, that when the teacher or professor uses a visual aid, like a PowerPoint presentation, it's a lot easier for you to take notes over what they're saying. And taking notes leads to better comprehension. So you want to make it easier for your audience to take notes. Third, it provides a clearer organization than not using a visual aid. This is kind of wrapped in with serving as notes, but it provides what a lot of people call a roadmap for your speech. The visual aid facilitates more eye contact and motion by the speaker, because what you can do with a visual aid is you can move the audience's attention from the visual aid to you dynamically, and get them to look at your visual aid and then back to you whenever you want. And when you get them to look back towards you, then you can make more eye contact and have a bigger presence. And third is a visual aid contributes speaker credibility. And this is a less known benefit of visual aids, because if you really think about it, speakers seem like they know what they're talking about if they have all of their points written down beforehand. You can't make a visual aid if you're just making it up on the spot. So it makes it seem like you did all of your research. And these are why visual aids are really important. You will just overall seem like a better speaker if you are able to use a visual aid. It's sort of the difference between showing up wearing, really nice clothes and showing up in just your regular casual clothes. It's like that's having a visual aid against not having a visual aid for something like a business presentation. Next, what we want to do is move on towards our different types of visual aids. So a really important type of visual aid is the the graph. So I have a couple of examples here. We have the pie graph, the bar graph, and the line graph. So the pie graph, what that does is it helps, it shows you percent. So, maybe this one is like 15 percent of 100. And maybe this one's also 15%. These are really useful when it comes to like business or a lot of business things when you're trying to show interest. This is like when I say business, I mean it shows like the percentage of consumers who believe something. It's really good for survey results and comparing out of 100. The bar graph is really useful for science and showing number. So this could be say it's 5. This one could be 25 and 2, 5, 5 and 2. And then if you're doing something with science, you would want to include your bars of error, which would be like this. And it would show these are derived from your data, and it basically, when the bars overlap, then you know that there is not like a big difference. Like say that 5 is there and this 25 at a bar that goes all the way down like this, it basically means it could be the count that you got was 25, but it could be out from 27 down to like 6. And then line graphs, those really show change over time. So more often than not, you're going to have time down here. Oh, it's a little hard for me to write with my mouse pad. And then, so time is not a variable that you change. It's just something like measured, something that elapses. And this is what you're measuring. So like this line here is your y-axis, and it's what you're measuring. And you'd often include something like a, like a y equals mx plus b. I'm sure you guys all know a lot of this already, but like I said before, most of my education is in science, and improper use of graphs really gets me irritated in a lot of scientific speeches. I have to watch a lot for class, and a lot of people will try to use pie graphs to show something like number instead of percent, or they'll put time in the y and then something else in the x, and that's just not how you're supposed to do it. There's also a couple other there's a lot of other uses for visual aids and types of visual aids. So I'm going to stop my screen share now. I'm going to come back to it later. Like photographs, pictures, diagrams, sketches, and so we talked about charts, but we talked about graphs, and some people call them charts, but flow graphs are important. Flow charts, excuse me, pictographs, everything like that. Kind of a nerdy question. Does anybody else have a favorite type of visual aid, or like a favorite type of graph? No. My favorite type of graph is definitely or a visual aid is definitely the flow chart. I like making them. a lot of people sometimes call them decision trees. So I like to sit down and make, really big, like 10-page decision trees about, science experiments or like how to run something. I like to make them instead of like instruction manuals. But that was just sort of a nerdy thing. So next we're going to get to tips for using visual aids. And for that, I have a couple of other slides, but we're just going to sort of go down the list here. So one big tip for using visual aids that a lot of people have a hard time with is that you need to stand to the side of the visual aid. If you're blocking the visual aid, then people aren't going to be able to see it. I know that I've talked before about your need to be the center of attention while you're giving your speech, but that doesn't mean that you need to stand in the center of the stage. Our sort of textbook for the course says that traditionally speakers stand to the left of the visual aid. I think that they have this confused. So most of the time, a speaker will stand with the visual aid on their right-hand side, but it will appear that it's on their left if you're looking from the audience. So you'd use, your right hand to point, or your left hand with a laser pointer across your body or something. But from the audience, it's on the speaker's left side. Next, you need to maintain eye contact. So while using the visual aid, you may be tempted to look back at the visual aid, or to think that the audience is just going to be looking at whatever you made or brought for a visual aid and stop looking at the audience. You should never turn your back to the audience, and that includes the back of your head. So if you look at me here, if you imagine that I had a visual aid, again, it's going to be on my right side, but you guys see the screen mirrored like my audience would, and you see it to the left of me. But so you'd be pointing here, and you can look just a little bit and glance to make sure you're pointing it the right way. But if you turn to read, you've broken eye contact. And if you turn your head, it's the same thing. You want to give like a quarter turn and then turn the side of your face and move your eyes and not turn your whole body to look at the visual aid. That's really important for speaker presence. So a speaker should never turn their back to an audience, and that includes their back here and the back of their head. So another thing that you want to do is to introduce a visual aid before talking about the information that's on it. Giving background information is really, really important. So you have to talk about where the visual aid was obtained from. If you made it, then that's not necessarily important. But if it is like, if your visual aid is a primary source, or if it's an object, then you need to talk about where it came from. And it just allows the audience to understand, what's going on. So, say for instance, I was over here. This is my brother's here. So I wouldn't want to just show you guys this trophy and then start talking about it. What you'd want to do is say something like, say I was giving a speech about debate, and I would say, my brother is very successful. He won a lot of trophies. Here's one in particular. Instead of showing the visual aid and then introducing it, you want to give background before it's shown to the audience. That's one that's often missed, but it is really important for understanding. Okay, so I know I've just talked for, it seems like 10 minutes straight without, interacting with you guys. So, excuse me. Do you guys have any questions so far about the use of visual aids?
So how do you give background information? So you mean you had to talk about what you are going to present before you show them the information, the charts or the graphs?
Yeah. So, if we go back to, let's see, we'll go back to share screen. We go back to, our charts here. If I just pulled this up without saying anything to you guys, and I left it up I left up all of these charts, and then, a minute later, I got into explaining what each one of them meant, it'd be pretty confusing. Or, and I'm talking about the context of a scientific presentation or like a business presentation where the numbers on these visual aids actually meant something. Excuse me. You need to introduce the data before you talk about it, before you show a pie chart about it or any kind of chart. And you need to introduce the concept. So if I was going to bring up this pie chart that said, like, say we are, I'm a zookeeper and I'm worried about the amount of penguins that I think are too hot in the zoo. I would want to, and I'm talking to the zoo's manager about lowering the temperature for the penguins. Say, I'd want to tell him that 65% of the penguins are doing okay, but 15% of them are too hot, and another 15 are, way too hot, like dangerous. You have to say that first, and then you pull out the pie chart. You don't have this, like, you don't bring out the pie chart first, and then that just like says a bunch of, has a bunch of figures on it, and then you talk about it. You have to basically verbally say what the pie chart is saying, and then you show it. And that's like a really important, so that's actually something we're going to get into in a second, with our point here. So supplement, do not supplant the speech with the visual aid. And I'm going to get back to that in just 1 second. Vicky, you had a question.
Yeah, so that means before your presentation, you put the pie or bar on the screen, but you don't need to put any number on it, right?
No, so you don't, the numbers they're situational. Visual aids are very fluent, they're very fluid, excuse me, and there's no like rules about how exactly you have to do it. So what I mean with that pie chart is the numbers, like imagine you're giving a PowerPoint presentation and you know that the pie chart is on the next slide. What you want to say is like 65% of penguins are okay and 15% of them are too hot. And then you click to the next slide and then it shows that graph with the numbers on it. What you don't want to do is, that it's on the next slide, then you click to the graph without telling anybody what it's about, and then talk about it. You basically just want to give, 2 or 3 sentences about the graph before you show it to somebody. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but so how about you present your slides and show the number at the same time? Is
Yeah,
it okay?
You can do that. So you can show the numbers at the same time. What I like to do personally, I didn't do it for this class because I didn't know how well the the share screen would work. So when I'm giving a data-driven presentation, I have my slide pulled up, and then after each, on my note card, I'll have my figures written out. And after each, every time I say a figure, I'll have it appear on screen because you can have text come in, one piece at a time. So you want like a slide with your data and then the visual, then the chart after. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great. So we just talked about how introducing a visual aid is important. Next, we need to practice with your visual aid. So the visual aid adds an additional focus for the audience, and the speaker needs to be able to smoothly and effectively interact with it to minimize distractions. So, like I said earlier, you should be able to dynamically shift the audience's attention between your visual aid and you. So when you want them to look at the visual aid, you need to be pointing at it. You need to use a laser pointer or something to bring people's attention to it. And then when you're done, you need to make a movement, like step forward, step to the side, and get people to look back at you. Experience with one type of visual aid does not necessarily provide the resources to deal with others. So I do a lot of work with PowerPoint presentations, but that does not make me qualified to give a presentation on carpentry, using the carpentry tools and wooden objects as examples. I do, it's just a different type of visual aid. So you need to practice with each type of visual aid that you're going to use. And this all relates back to our general public speaking tips that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. When you use a visual aid, you need to practice with the aid that you're using. Your visual aid, it's tempting to have that be the last thing that you do, is to write your visual aid, but you need to write it at the same time that you're writing your speech. You need to be able to practice it. Last week, I gave you guys the advice that if you're nervous, you should practice in the same room where you'll give that speech later. It's also really important to practice with your visual aid in there. Make sure the technology's working. Will your computer hook up? How well does the remote use to work to change slides? Where does the projector shine where you can stand that you're not in the way? These are all key parts of using the visual aid effectively. Next, you need to make sure that your visual aid supports your message. Consistency between what's being said and what's on screen is crucial to your credibility. So if you say one thing and your visual aid contradicts you, then that's obviously not good. But there are other, smaller instances of contradiction that are just as bad. Like if your visual aid is, a PowerPoint and the slide that you're on is talking about something completely different from what you're talking about, then you're going to lose some credibility because you seem disorganized. And you need to make sure that all of your figures agree with each other. All right, so next we're going to move into another screen sharing slide that I have, which is about, that you should supplement and not supplant a speech using the visual aid. So this is I have an example of a bad visual aid. And on the slide, it tells you exactly how it's bad. Oops, sorry. So this is an example of a bad visual aid, and it would supplant the speech. So do not allow the visual aid to overwhelm the speech itself. Visual aids are not crutches to lean on, but rather lampposts that illuminate your point. Try not to include long, rambling sentences in your visual aid. They take a long time to read, and they make the audience focus on something that isn't you. Visual aids should have a few short sentences or even just a few words. So, can anyone tell me why I think this is a bad slide or a bad visual aid?
Are you sharing your screen? I don't
Oh,
see.
am I? Oh, no. I'm so sorry. I forgot to click share. I don't use Skype very often. I'm so sorry. So here's the slide I was talking about. Can anyone tell me why I would think this is a bad visual aid?
Too many words.
Yes, it's too many words, and it's only divided in, it's only one bullet point. The rest of it is okay. So we're going to talk about design principles here in a second. But the title is really long, and this is just one big long bullet point, and it's just gross. It's, people don't want to read that. I have an example of a good, a better slide here with sort of a wordy title, but just a couple of, sentences or a couple of words. So we use neutral colors. There's no unnecessary information, and there's no font changes. Those are the three big things that each PowerPoint slide needs to have. You can use pictures if they're necessary, but I personally like to, I personally think that pictures take the focus away from the speaker because people look at them too much. I personally like to just do very clean, very simple slides. All right. So we're back here. So we need, like I said, supplement and do not supplant your speech using the visual aid. Next, ensure that the logistics of the setting are conducive to the visual aid. That's kind of a complicated sentence, but it, brought back into easier terms, it's basically says that make sure that where you're giving the speech, allow for your visual aid to be there. So everyone needs to be able to see your visual aid. The electronic equipment needs to be functioning, and you need to know how to use it. And the visual aid needs to be set up before you give your speech. You need to test it before you give your speech. This is something I often see sometimes with myself when I'm running late, or a lot of the times with my classmates, is they will show up right before their speech starts and try to set up their laptop, and they maybe don't have the right cord to plug into the projector, or have other difficulties with it, but they waste 10 minutes of their time trying to get their speech set, like their visual aid set up. You need to know how to set it up quickly, and you need to do it beforehand. Next, you need to point out key elements of your visual aid, especially when it's complicated. You need to do this for pictures, charts, graphs, and some objects. If you have a wordy, like not just wordy, like just like text, pointing things out isn't very necessary. But if you're going to use graphs, you need to direct the audience's attention towards the part of the graph that you're talking about. Especially if it's really complicated. Like I've said before, I am a biologist. First and foremost, I do biological writing and biological presentations, and those have really complicated graphs and charts. And you have to direct the audience's attention towards what part of it you want them to look at. Next, avoid distributing materials before the speech. If there are supporting materials to assist the audience, they should be passed out after the speech. Failing to do so will delay the speech and lead to unnecessary rustling of paper and is an unnecessary distraction. So I know that it says it should be passed out before or after, but do not pass out handouts before a speech unless you want them to be filled out and returned to you. Passing out handouts or pieces of your visual aid before your speech just, lets the audience read your points before you say it. It takes the, it takes the attention away from you, especially in the beginning of the speech, and it shifts it to a piece of paper. You need to eliminate as many distractions as you can and try to just have you, just make the focus be you. Next, limit lists. If the visual aid utilizes lists to communicate the central ideas of a speech, it should be small and just a few words for each point. Generally, 5 items are the most you would ever want to include in a list. If you're not giving something that is definitively a number, then it should be 5. If you are doing something like, these are the 7 ways to know if this is a good book, then include all 7. But if you're just listing reasons or just listing evidence, limit yourself to 5 things. And then lastly, we have the simplicity is a good design principle. And we already talked about that a little bit on the slide. So we can take a look at that again. So simplicity here, neutral colors, no unnecessary information, and no font changes. This is something that I would like to use. I would maybe include a 3rd color as long as it doesn't clash and as long as that color is included in your other slides. But something just, more muted and agrees with, everything else. Simplicity. Don't get too complicated. Just include more slides if you need to use more information. Don't try to cram it all in. All right, so we're at the end of our lesson. I'm sorry for monologuing for most of it. It's just this lesson doesn't necessarily lend itself to a lot of interaction with you guys. That's why I tried to make the visual aids, like the PowerPoints, to try to show you guys something. And it was still a little bit too long to give my persuasive speech lesson. But I think that we can do that next week. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys next week for the persuasive speech lesson, right after our dress code lesson. And I would like you guys to have your answers for the visual aid worksheet prepared before class, because I'm gonna try to spend 5 minutes or less on it. With that being said, I want you guys to ask questions if you have any about tips for using visual aids, because we went over a couple more points after the last round of questions. So does anybody have any? That's fine. So I'll give some questions that I'm often asked. So people usually ask me, how do you know when a visual aid is too complicated? And I think that the best way to really know if something's too complicated is to take off your glasses and go to the middle of wherever room you are. And if you if it's too cluttered to understand from far away, then it's probably too complicated. Visual aids, they should be easy to understand and clear and concise. If I took my glasses off, I should still be able to understand what it's saying. People also seem to have a hard time with interaction with the visual aid. So I find that it's often, nice to have a laser pointer or something to point with, even if it's just something, like an expo marker and that you can point with. So if you're sitting here and you're going to point at point just for a second, like just look back for a second and point with the marker or something like that, while limiting the amount of time that you're looking away from the audience. Just holding something or using something to be able to point really helps you psychologically make that gap or make that change. And it's just much easier to make eye contact that way. Any other questions? Luke, you always seem to have some. Do you have any other questions for me today?
I really want others to ask their questions, but of course I have questions. Just want to give opportunity. Oh, okay, Vicky, you can go first.
I remember that when I asked my students to present their slide, they also put some illustration or some picture they like on the slide. Is it inappropriate?
So yeah, so a lot of people like to include pictures on their slides, and they're good when they're done correctly. My personal opinion is that pictures can be distracting, and pictures and images can be distracting to your audience when they aren't all the way relevant. Like some people just include images that relate to the content of their slide without, referencing them. So a good rule of thumb is that if you aren't going to point at the picture and explain what's in it, then you shouldn't include that picture. All parts of your visual aid need to be important to your speech, or you shouldn't include them.
So all of the picture are used to be decorated your slide. Is also not good, right?
What's that?
So the picture, student put out pictures. It used to be decorate your slide. You decorate your pie or chart. It's also not good, right?
No, I usually would not use pictures to decorate the slide. I just think that it's distracting. So, if you had just pictures on the corners of your slide, that's just something for the audience to look at that isn't you or what you're pointing at. And you want to minimize the amount of time that they aren't looking where you want them to.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a sign of the lack of confidence. So shifting people's focus on slides themselves instead of you.
Yes, I think that's exactly what I'm getting at, Luke, is that it's difficult to try to get comfortable enough to want all of the focus to be on you. But if you want to be the best speaker that you can be, you should always try to be moving the focus of the audience to where you want it. You need to be in charge of them, and they shouldn't be, looking at something that you don't want.
I feel that many teachers or students would like to be a better speaker, but they don't have feedback. Do you? So what kind of mechanism you have to get people's feedback, response, criticism? Because we don't have that kind of group. And people are like, they are afraid to give others criticism, even constructive criticism or feedback, because they don't want to offend people.
Yeah. So technology's been really good for that. So what a lot of people have been doing is they include QR codes on the last slide. So after they're all the way done and they have their slide concluding their whole speech, they'll have a QR code that has a link to a Google form that says give me some feedback, and people can all on their phone type out their comments and send it to the speaker anonymously, so they're not worried about the speaker being mad at them.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really helped. We do that in some of my classes, and I think that it's helped my public speaking, and it's helped a lot of my classmates too. All right. Are there any more questions? Got about 3 minutes left.
Jimmy, I would like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
When we study in the chapter and professor would like us to present, and we have lots of specific name or some special one to put on a PowerPoint, and before the presentation, maybe we will share them some definition, right? But there are lots of information, and we cannot remember in our brain. So how could we prepare it? Because when we want to present, and I don't want to put any kind of paper on my hand and to remember it, but in my brain, maybe I will be nervous, so I cannot remember it. But in our PPT, we cannot put many words. So how should I do?
Yeah, what people usually do in that case is they use a 3-inch by 5-inch note card, so something like this big, and just use that, as they have a couple of those, maybe 10 of those that they go back and forth from. It's a little less distracting than a whole piece of paper. Or if you guys have the ability, if you could use a second screen. So what a lot of the classrooms for communication at my university have is in front, where the speaker would stand, in front of them is a smaller screen that's also showing what the projector is showing, so that you can see your entire visual aid without ever looking back at it. Those are really useful tools. But if you don't have access to that technology, and if you don't want to use note cards, then your best bet is just to practice a lot and try to memorize what you want to say. It's tough, but over time, you're going to have an easier. It's going to be easier for you to remember what you wanted to say as you get more comfortable speaking.
Thank you.
All right. Well, guys, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today. I'm really excited for our lesson next week. I've been working hard on it, and for dress code, I think I'll dress up for you guys a little bit. So it should be a great one next week. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you, Jimmy.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Jimmy.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.